Now let's return to talking about the sexual triangle for a moment, because encapsulated in these 3 points are the total universe of things we will be studying. In the species, it has to do with the vast mammalian species that led into understanding the origin of humans as we are today, one species, Homo sapiens, about 250 to 300,000 years old, with a very specific genetic lineage, not unlike bonobos, chimpanzees, with whom we share about 96% or 97% of our genes. But the remaining 3 or 4% is critical because it gives us the human brain and all of the various things that are unique to human consciousness and awareness. Then, at the second level is culture and the influence that it plays on each of us by means of living in a particular thought world with its own particular language and culture. And then finally, the point of the individual. Now, when it came to the study of sexology, which is the origin of human sexual study in Western civilization, the doctors who were the originators or beginners of this study in the 19th century were primarily focused on only one point of this triangle, that is, the individual. Their sense was that sexology, as the science of human behavior, sexual behavior, was focused on the problems that people presented as individuals, typically as adults, but sometimes as children, and they believed that it must have a biological or even more specifically a medical focus. The kind of science that they practiced was relatively primitive in the 19th century and was largely derived from an evolutionary perspective by Western doctors in Germany, France, England, and the USA. Now, as the study of sexology got going in later decades, many things emerged. For example, the development of all of the important sexual identities in the late 19th century. Homosexuality, heterosexuality, bisexuality were coined mostly by medical doctors to talk about individuals who had an exclusive form of sexual behavior which had never before been seen in history. Now, you might ask yourself, how is it possible that nobody had ever seen homosexuals or bisexuals before? Well, the answer is there was no category, no language for them. There was no specific identity. Before that time, sexuality was just part of a general social organization. When people talked about sexuality, they talked about marriage, about family, about having children, about kinship, about living together as an extended family in a small village. It was only with the advent of modernism, with the Industrial Revolution, and with many forms of social change that investigators began to see individuals who had focused sexual behavior on one gender or the other. So because of that, we now understand today that sexology is really a much more complex issue. When those new identities were introduced, when there was new ways of seeing sexual behavior occur, that began to indicate that sexual culture was really part of this whole mixture of understanding human behavior. So let's talk about the culture part of sexual culture. In this course, we are doing what would be called the anthropology of sexuality or the anthropology of sex and gender. This comes out, of course, of the study of anthropology, which is only from the 20th century, specifically around the time of World War I, when anthropology was invented. Anthropology began to focus on a particular way of thinking about human nature. And let's talk about what human nature is. Previously, human nature was regarded as something that was just biology, something that you get from the genes, from your hormones, from your brain. And so when you hear pundits in the media talk about nature-nurture, which you will understand that they are talking about the biology or the learned, perhaps cultural component of human nature. Now, human sexual nature is one part of this human nature. Human nature, the way that we talk about it in this course, is a combination of both our biological heritage and our cultural heritage. If you like, human nature is both objective and subjective because science tells us what it knows as objective facts about the DNA, about our central nervous system, our brain, and our organic functioning. And culture has its own particular definition of human nature. Each culture has its own vision of what sexuality is, its meanings, and its ways of thinking about what human sexuality is. So to be human is to have a biological skin and a cultural skin. Both of these are very important. Then when you place that into the context of culture study, it becomes more clear why the biological investigators and doctors in the 19th century left out culture. It is a complex thing. It contains shared meanings and practices, and that's not what doctors study. Doctors study biology, the functioning of the medical system. Now, anthropologists, when in the 20th century began to study cultures out in the field, they began to realize that each culture is a system. A system means that when you change one thing, everything else changes in it. It's dynamic, like aerodynamics. And culture as a system of shared meanings and practices creates the ways in which people perceive and respond to their world, to their environment, and also equips them with the tools such as technology in order to master and adapt to their environment. Sexual culture is the very specific sexual meanings and sexual behaviors that people draw upon in creating a boundary to say, this is who we are, this is what we do, this is how we have sex, this is our sexual understanding, this is what we allow, this is what we do not allow. It's their way of saying what is natural and normal in their particular culture, their particular family, their religion, their community, their education. It's very, very distinctive of their subjective sense of being human. And that's what we're going to study. In this course, we are going to examine a range of sexual cultures. After all, today in the world, even though there are many cultures that are extinct now, as time and history went by, there are still thousands and thousands of different sexual cultures, some of them quite unique compared to our own. They have their own tradition and history, their own religious system. And these cultures, when you add all of them together, they create a much expanded definition of human sexual nature, far more than the biology would predict. Because after all, when humans engage in sexual behavior, most of that sexual behavior is for pleasure. It is not for procreation. One very significant biologist at UCLA has estimated that about 95% of all sexual interactions for humans are done for pleasure, not for procreation. And that is in keeping with this expanded definition of human sexual nature, because sex is for many different things. It's for being in love, it's for feeling close, it's for procreation, for making families, it's also for being intimate, it's for being powerful, it's also for money, it's for creating particular communities, particular ways of expressing our humanness. All of those are part of the expanded definition of human sexual nature when we look across the globe at the range of different societies.